Hello and welcome back to the How to Get an Analytics Job podcast. In this podcast episode, our guest lecturer is Bethany Klebanov, who has years of experience hiring analysts. So in this podcast episode, we're going to be focusing on data visualization or Power BI or Tableau interviews. So in the first section of this podcast episode, Bethany and I are going to talk about her process of how she interviews analysts. Then we're going to hop into the interactive portion where Ben and Christina from my Greensboro College class have actually volunteered to do a mock interview. Then we're going to round out the episode where Al and I are going to be doing the LinkedIn submitted Q&A. So if you're brand new to the podcast, you can head over to LinkedIn and look up our webpage and follow along and actually ask questions for upcoming podcast episodes. This podcast is brought to you by Panoply. Panoply is a platform that allows you to connect to 60 different data sources, where you can study your data in SQL, visualize it in tools like Power BI or Tableau, or even analyze it in your favorite programming language. Click the link in the description down below and you can get a free 14-day trial to panoply.io. If you're getting any value out of these podcast episodes, the best thing that you can do to give back to us is leave a like, a comment in the comment section down below, or even share this with your network. This will help boost our signal out on the YouTube algorithm so that we can help even more people land an analytics job. Also, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell if you want to be notified each time we post a new podcast episode. With all that being said, let's jump into the podcast episode. So, Bethany, tell us, what is your approach to conducting analytics interviews? For those of you listening, we actually started to get into this, and I was like, we just need to hit record and capture what she's about to say.
So how I approach it is I would say there's two parts to being a good analyst. So one, there's technical skills. I think that's kind of the more straightforward. There are a lot of less straightforward skills that are needed, and in my mind are like the big differentiator between somebody who's really going to excel and somebody who can do what you tell them, right? And I want somebody who can excel and kind of move up and be more independent. So for that, I really want to try to understand a little bit more about how they approach a question. How do they deal with ambiguity? How are they going to work with other people? When are they going to go talk to other people? If they need, what kind of input? So there's different types of situations where they might need to talk to somebody in the business. How well do I think they're going to be able to explain technical things to somebody who might not know the first thing about what they're talking about? And can they translate into language that will make sense to that broader audience?
So what's really interesting is that, so we're posting these like guest lectures as YouTube videos. I can use the analytics on the back end of YouTube to track when my guests, like, for example, we've had people talk about somewhat technical things in the past interviews. I can see in the drop-off rates when they're not doing a good job. so like if they're going like super detailed, it's like, which wouldn't that be awesome if you could have a tool like that of like, you could hook into someone's brain and it's like, oh, I'm losing them. Pull it back.
It is definitely a different skill. And in my mind, it's a tough one. And it's one that is not, I think, focused on in a lot of academic settings. Now, I was a little bit fortunate. I actually had a professor my senior year. We had a whole year of advanced, I don't know, it was a long time ago. So advanced data analysis, I think it was called, right? And so like a whole semester was on like the minutia and, proofs of regression, right? And then so many of the other techniques are really variations on that theme, right? So if you have like a really good grounding in regression, a lot of other things stem off of that, changes some of the assumptions and things like that. So the second semester was all about approaching problems. So we got data, we had to analyze the data. And one thing that I thought was key, and that I think I don't see as much as I would be good for the students, honestly, is that we had two sections. One was the first section was explain your analysis and your conclusions to a non-technical audience. So you could assume, they know some basic things, they know what a mean, an average or a mean, whatever kind of language you're going to use, but you need to be explain to them, what did you do? Why did you do it? And what did you conclude from it? And not get into any kind of jargon. And then have the backup of here's all of the technical things that I did, right? People don't care about testing leverage points. They don't know what you're talking about. They don't care that you did it. They wouldn't know if you did or didn't do it, and so they want to know generally, why did you do this? What does it get me? And have confidence that you know what you're doing. And if you talk, some people, maybe if you talk in technicalities, like technical jargon, maybe they'll start to think that you know what you're doing, but they're not going to have faith in how they use it because they don't know what you did or why.
So I think what's being played here, and push back on this if you think that this is a tinfoil hat theory here, I think it's the status game that's being played. So like in academia, isn't it actually looked down upon in a lot of fields if the research is applied and it has a useful, like the more complex it is and the more theoretical, the more it's looked up upon?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I think that's an overgeneralization. I mean, there are certainly people who are more into pure research, and there's people who are more into applied research. And there's a lot of that goes into crossover kinds of things. So, I mean, I think that's going to be a little bit on, what are you doing? If you're trying to have some breakthrough technique of, just the sequencing of, I don't know, like when people were working on sequencing DNA, right? There's like, can you actually do this thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is different than, okay, what are all the applications that I could have of it? So there's certain times when like a technique is the thing that you are researching versus the application of it. But I wouldn't say that the application is like looked down upon. I mean, again, I spent time in the social sciences. A lot of it there's laboratory stuff, but there's also stuff that goes out into the world in general. And there is crossover and a continuum of where you're doing that research. So, and they each have their place, right?
Okay.
To understand the minutia of something, you need to control everything, but you also need to understand how that translates out into the world and people in reality.
Well, I guess what kind of where I was to bring this back to analytics and then people communicating in the workforce and in interviews is they feel like if they can show how their chops and their intensity on how technical they are, that shows how valuable they are. It's like they're flexing their intellectual might, and that gives, they're thinking that they're sending a strong signal that, hey, I'm a good analyst. But what they're actually showing is that they can't communicate.
Often, I think that's true. So one, there's what you can do technically and how well you can communicate it are two sides of the coin. If you are the best technical person and you can just do all these amazing wizardry things with your algorithms and, ETL work is just like the most efficient and all of this stuff, it does not matter in the world if nobody understands what you did, so they aren't comfortable actually using any of it.
Interesting. So, I like that.
So you will limit yourself, and this goes to like career paths, right? So as you're going out into the world and you're interviewing, what kind of career do you want to have? Because there's different paths in analytics, and I think people kind of think they're all the same, but they're really not. There's a breadth of what analytics entails, right? There are plenty of people who could live their life in Excel and consider themselves analysts and maybe the most technically savvy person at the place they work. And they could have a whole career just building Excel tools and analyzing data in Excel. right? So you could have something like that. You can have people who are doing stuff in Hadoop and running all kinds of the latest, greatest, and you can have people who are specialized in like deep learning algorithms, right? Those people could all be have different skills altogether, right?
Right. Yeah.
If you're maintaining Hadoop, that doesn't mean you know anything about running an algorithm on it. It doesn't mean you know anything about what's happening in Excel, right? How
Right.
valuable what you're doing is twofold. Like, one, what is the company ready to action on? And how well are you able to sell it? And there is selling. So if you think you're going to get into analytics and it's all technical and you don't have to sell, I'm not a huge, like, I couldn't be a salesperson, right? But you got to sell your work. So you got to get comfortable with at least selling your own work. Because there's buying into your idea of what to do and getting people to then take your results and do something with them. Because if I build a great marketing model, right, I'm going to say, here's what you should market. This is the next thing you should market to these people, right? This is the thing that I think is the next best offer. If that just sits in a file or in a database somewhere and nobody actually sends those offers out, which would never be my job. I don't send out emails, right? I don't design the creative that goes along with those emails. Somebody else does all that, right? So if they don't pick it up and trust that, yes, this is going to get us better sales and trust in that, then it's not going to go anywhere and I might as well not have done it.
Yeah, so I've been calling it sales or influence skills. I think influence is more encompassing because I think sales falls under influence, but I think that influence also being respected in your company by getting historical wins and being right consistently, then you get buy-in on your projects. I mean, hopefully you hit like a critical mass point where instead of having to convince people, they're going to start proactively asking for your opinion on what should I do here. So you're kind of like a consultant and it's a salesperson. It's kind of like consultative sales. So before I got into this, I was 100% commission sales. I'm a fantastic salesperson. It's interesting seeing that my sales skills map on top of my analytical technical skills, because those intersections are where like you can really start to stand out. And there's very few people that are kind of at those intersects.
Yes. And just like I said, you can be the best at building out algorithms, but if you can't communicate with the people in the business who need to use them and do something with them and they don't adopt them, you will go away at some point because and it depends on how funding. I think this is another thing that analysts don't think a lot about. How funding works at different companies is different. Sometimes you actually could be like a shared service sort of. There's a lot of models where you get funded by the business by what projects they have you do. If you are not, if your group is not good as a whole at interacting with the business and having them trust in you and coming to you with their problems, they can sometimes, in situations like that, they can go to outside places. If you're like on an internal group, they could go to a consultant to do some of that work instead if they're not really confident in you. And if you don't get enough funding, you can have your group impacted and downsized and things like that. So, not to be like doom and gloom, but there are it's like a real issue that you need to, I think most analysts don't necessarily think about early in their career, but would do them well. Additionally, if you want to move up the ranks, right? If you want to be a manager, if you want to be like lead an analytics organization, you do less and less of the actual, like, I don't code that much. I do sometimes, but like, I'm not sitting there, writing up advanced queries or things. There's other people who
You're guiding the ship. That's your job.
Yeah, exactly. And so,
charting the course.
So at some point, and there's different tracks, right? There's some people who decide to keep up on the technical and they're like the super technical SME. And then, but if you don't necessarily want to do that. If you want to go, you want to lead the organization, all the more important that you have the interpersonal skills and the ability to explain. And it's very difficult. So this is what I think also a misnomer, getting into all the jargon and explaining things in a highly detailed technical way is easier than abstracting it more and getting the essence of it. It's like if you ever write a paper and you had to write an abstract, the abstract is short, but it's the hardest part to write.
Yeah, it's like what I'm actually focusing on that now that I'm in a role where I'm teaching. It's much harder to teach something than to just do it, because then I have to unpack my intuition and like, well, why did I do this? And okay, well, here's my approach. And then you have to like actually think through how to, I don't know. I guess the way that I think about it is I kind of like visualize what I'm going to do. And usually I don't have to verbalize it, or I don't have to critically think about it. I'll just implement it. To where like with the students here, we actually were just working on, actually just yesterday, we were working on this project where we had to look at the top 10 items across different regional distribution centers. And I could do it in 10 minutes. I could create that visualization in 10 minutes, but explaining to them like the user interface for the end client and like how you would put a filter up, and you can just filter the Tableau visualization based on RDC, and how that's going to filter the top 10, and the items are going to change based on how the data is being filtered, is a lot more difficult than me just going. Because I mean, these projects that the students are working on take like 2 weeks. I could knock them out in like an hour. I don't mean to be rude to you guys, you students on the call.
But I think that's something that I've had a lot of times, because, even as I do less of like the detailed work, when there's issues, it escalates up, right? And so that's where having somebody who does have technical background leading the helm, as it were, in a lot of situations is better than, because some places you'll find there's people who don't really know anything about the technical part, who do lead analytics organizations, and it can be a little bit tricky, right? Because they can only help so much. Lots of things go on there. But anyway, the thing that I think is important to note, because I've had a lot of times where they're like, well, how did you know that? How did you do that so fast? Like even something stupid, trailing blank spaces. Okay. Once you have had trailing blank spaces bite you in the butt a couple of times, they are a go-to when things aren't matching that look like they should be matching, right? But if you've never encountered them before, they can be very hard to find and time consuming to like all of these things of like, I can see here is A, why are they not matching up?
Because there's just a space.
Because there's a space
right.
or multiple spaces, at the end. So like you visually are looking and you're like, what could it be? And so this is even where, and this is a little bit, I'm dating myself, I'm older. I've been doing this for 25 odd years and plus years. And, back in the day, it was a lot harder, honestly. Like you would get a lot of flat files. You would have to read those in, not that those don't exist anymore, but, SAS was kind of the main tool that everybody used. And you had to go and allocate space, specific amounts of space for everything that you are reading in, because you only have so much space on your desktop or wherever you're working on this, which is probably your desktop. I had to actually, for like an 800 meg, which is nothing right anymore, but like I had an 800 meg file early in my career that I needed an extra hard drive put in my computer to be able to sort it.
Wow.
Okay. And so space, allocation of memory, use of memory, disk space, these were all things that you had to really actively manage, not because you like were in control of the Hadoop cluster, but like every single analyst on their computer had to know how to do some of those, like understand those things in a way that I think a lot of people don't today. So with that, you were reading in all of these things, you're having to be very specific. You can't just have all this extra space. So there are a lot of minute kind of data issues you would encounter just trying to get your data to freaking read in so that you could do anything else with it. And it's like, if you had a new data source, it could take you a day or two, depending upon how big it was, to work through all the issues of where it would fail out reading in your data.
So to bring it back to the students, we actually we had a call with the client last week, and I can't remember why the data quality issue came up, but he said I needed to pull two different files from their internal system. One that was looking at item level detail, and then the other was looking at assortment and item level. And what's funny is that I didn't ask him why, but it came up so Mondays we typically work on case studies, and then Wednesdays we have this podcast episode. So while that group was working on that data, one of the students accidentally tried to visualize the data in the wrong way. And then he was like, this is different than everyone else's work. And it's like, yep, it was right there. So on that note, these students they're proficient in Tableau, I would say, because like they have a Tableau portfolio, and they've been working for the past 3 months with an actual client, and they've been building out dashboards. You've mentioned that you hired people for Power BI and Tableau positions in the past.
Yep.
So how do you assess those skills? And I guess let's pivot. Let's kind of root this in entry level, and then maybe we can go into kind of like what would an intermediate or an advanced interview look like? So
particularly entry level, I would say, if you're really entry level coming out of school, sorry, my dog. So if you're hold on one second. Hey.
Uh-oh, we've got a new guest on the podcast now.
Sorry. My dog is upset about something. So, what was I saying? Okay. So hiring really new people, I may not expect that they even know Tableau or Power BI. Particularly then their approach to, just how they approach problems, how they think about things, how they can, when I'm talking to them, how well they communicate, how well they're able to kind of pivot and change topics, how well are they able to, like if I probe, do they get flustered, or are they able to keep going? Like all of that matters to me just as much as, because if I get like that they understand data structures, and I get that they, they can learn stuff, right? I mean, like most of the technologies that are used today did not exist when I came out of school, right?
Right.
So it's really about like, what can I learn and go from there.
How can you signal that though, that you are a good proactive learner, or you are just a sponge?
Well, I think part of that is, what did you study in school? What kind of classes did you take? If you do have things that you've done that you can show, if you can show a progression even of, if you've built dashboards, it's like, here's some of my early dashboards, and then show, but I knew there had to be a better way to do what I, kind of forced over here in this way. And then I found a more elegant way to do that was more efficient, or, whatever. And just kind of always showing like a progression of what you've done. If you're a little farther in your career, showing I've taken on more responsibility. I've done, like, maybe it's that, you started mentoring the people who were coming in behind you, even if you weren't their manager, or, you progress in getting responsibilities for, what needs to happen on a project.
Okay, so how would you, what are the specific questions, and would you do kind of like I have had people kind of in my orbit who just finished up grad school, and they reached out to me to help them prepare for like this company sent them just like a sports data file or some random, I don't know, world population data file. And they said, analyze this data and bring it to the interview. Is that common practice, or is that a way that you would approach it?
There are a fair number of places that do that. I think there's more than, that I think a lot of places are kind of moving towards that, because it is really hard. There's a lot of people who say that they have skills who don't really,
Right.
So I think a lot of that is trying to vet some of that out and get to like understand some of the things I've been talking about. So how does somebody approach a problem? If I just give you, here's a fairly vague ask, what are you going to come up with? And I think people should, did they come back and ask me any questions? Right?
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Unless somebody has explicitly told you, here, do this and just figure it out. If somebody comes and asks me questions, and especially if they're good questions, like, is this a good assumption? Does this mean this? Get some clarification. Not like, oh, is this a good idea to do this? But like clarifying questions, because it's very rare that you go into something and there's like just nothing that comes that you have a question about, right? It's all obvious. Or, sometimes you'll find something that looks a little weird. Like, should I assume that's a data issue? Should I assume this has been cleaned? Should I assume, getting those kinds of clarifications shows to me, like, if I was the one asking them to do the analysis, that would show me that then they have initiative and they're not going to go blindly do something and not ask questions to help guide what they're doing and make sure that they're not making wrong assumptions.
Right. I think people are too focused on, can you do the technical stuff? And they fixate on that. But it's like, okay, you could spend, and I've seen this in the workplace, like someone will spend, I don't know, 30 hours in a week on a project that does this much for the business. And that's a misallocation of the company's resources. And that's a risk to the hiring manager.
Yes.
So yeah, I can see how you would want to make sure that I think that kind of gets back to the soft skill of like being coachable and listening and wanting to absorb.
And there's a balance, and this gets to sort of that balance too, of there are people, right? If I'm interviewing people there, I want to make sure they're not going to like, I want them to be comfortable making some conclusions, right? You don't have time. If you have a bunch of people reporting to you, you don't have time for them all to come and ask you like every minutia, about all the minutia of everything that they're doing, right? Mm-hmm. So there's also like, every time you come to any kind of roadblock, you can't just go, oh, it's a roadblock, I got to go ask somebody, right? You need to be able to spend a certain amount of time working on it, but understand when you need to stop and go raise it up, right? So you need to be willing and able to, at least a lot of the time, figure some of those things out for yourself. However, you also can't like just sit there and spin and waste time when asking somebody else could solve your problem. And it's a balance, and it's not an easy one, and you're not always going to get it right, but it's something that you should be kind of striving to achieve, because I have been put in a bad position by somebody who was under me, taking too long to try to figure it out and not wanting to look bad, or I'm not sure. But then it was like, okay, now I'm up till 2 a.m. getting something out to a client because they didn't get their stuff done in time, or I ended up having to kind of redo it or do something because it wasn't right and they didn't ask for help in time.
Okay. I want to bring the students into this conversation, because I think we are doing an effective job within the client. So Ben and Christina are both on the call, and they are in a group together. So Ben and Christina, why don't you fill us in on what happened this morning? So you met with the client, but I guess walk us through what went on in the meeting.
Yeah, so we had a dashboard that we finished up in class, or at least thought that we had got mostly finished. And so with our client, Mr. Oliver, we basically just ran by the two visualizations that we put together in the one dashboard and made sure that what we had was accurate and okay with him, and that he was pleased with it, and if he had any more suggestions. which he had 2 small ones. And then we kind of talked through those. And then after that, we discussed the next phase of our project, I guess, the last couple weeks of class.
Awesome. So Bethany, I think what we did exactly that. And I haven't explicitly told the students this. Well, maybe I did. I don't know. Ben or Christina, tell me if I don't think I've quite said, like, you need to have like a MVP or a minimal viable product out. And then, because until you have something that you can specifically point to, it's very hard to talk through the details of something. And then also too, it's kind of a leadership practice of, okay, I think I understand what you need. Like here's like the need that you have. You're trying to uncover this insight. Here's my approach to it. Is this accurate? And a lot of times it'll open up new opportunities, because then they'll be like, oh, I didn't even think about, putting that filter on there. Can you add this filter as well? And what's funny is, like, I'm teaching you guys sales skills, because what I do at Silvertone is I typically start with a sales dashboard. And with these companies, so these companies that I'm working with are, I want to say 250 million in revenue or less. So a lot of times they don't even have money or budget for any type of analytics team. So just getting their data like combined into one space and then throwing a couple of filters on, they're like,
it's huge.
Oh my God, I've always thought about this. And then they start having all these. And then what's funny is they're starting to sell my services to themselves, which is, and it relates back to you guys working in the field, because that means that you're getting buy-in on your projects.
Also, a lot of people can't abstract. I would say most people are not good at abstracting. So it's very hard to talk about things in the theoretical, and especially if it's different than what they know. Because if you ask a lot of people about what they want, they might tell you what they already have, which could be terrible. I mean, you see lots of terrible like reports and things like that, right? So you have where you might create a visualization and try to be looking at some trends, and you can kind of start at a higher level and drill in where you maybe are seeing some things that look odd. A lot of times people are coming from like Excel or PowerPoint world, where there's like, 1,000 numbers in an Excel spreadsheet that they're perusing, or, that then gets whittled down to one PowerPoint graph or something, that's just static in what it is. So if you ask them, they'll often just ask you to recreate that, which isn't what they really, it may meet some kind of need, but it's not what it should be, right? It's not what it could be. It's not what it should be. It could actually be harder for you to try to, because I've actually had people, they want like the layout exactly like it was in this Excel spreadsheet. And I have to explain to them, that is not how Tableau works, right? It is not Excel. I can't make 2 cells that have nothing to do with each other, right next to each other. I can't do that,
Yeah.
It's not the same. So helping people to envision something new and how it could get them to their answer faster is important. So, but that isn't interviewing. I mean, I guess that goes.
I was about to say that this conversation is getting all over, and it's all good.
So,
I feel like, but yeah, let's bring it back. So we kind of touched on like entry level Power BI interview or Tableau interviews. Would a intermediate or advanced, would that look? That would be much more technically focused, right? So entry level, you're just trying to show that you're a sponge and you can learn and you're interested, and you've actually done things that demonstrate that, like the classes you've taken, maybe you have a portfolio.
I mean, I guess again, it kind of depends, because which technologies you've used is going to be really determined by where have you been working. If you've been working at a place that has Tableau, you're going to know Tableau, right? If you've been working somewhere that focuses in Power BI, you're going to know Power BI. In my world, if you could do one, you could learn the other one, even if you don't know it yet. So I don't necessarily care even like programming, right? If you know how to program, you know how to program. If I want you to program Python and you haven't programmed Python yet, but you can talk to me and demonstrate that you understand programming, then you should be able to learn Python, right?
Mhm.
So again, this is where like the tools are changing. Which tools are available to you are going to be really a determiner of what you've done thus far. So really, regardless of which level you're at, it's showing me that you can learn new things and that you're still interested in that. Because some people stop at some point.
Yeah. And they
That
become
you're
dinosaurs.
continuing. Also, like as you're going up, again, this is where it's like, what kind of role are you interviewing for as you move forward? Are you interviewing for something where you have more of a supervisory role? Are you interviewing for a very technical SME kind of job? Or am I interviewing you for like a specific technical skill that I'm trying to fill? Like, if I have a project and I need, one very specific, we have tornado siren testing happening. I don't know if you can hear that. It's just a test. It's not a real tornado. It's very loud though. But so if I have like I need a Power BI developer right now for a project that I'm trying to staff, then I'm going to care very much that you know Power BI right now. If I'm just sort of generally hiring, then I'm going to be more flexible. So like, what is the role that I'm trying to fulfill?
So I'm kind of guiding the conversation so the YouTube algorithm will bless this conversation.
Which makes sense.
Because we're ranking very high on Tableau and Power BI certifications. Do they matter? As someone who hires people for Tableau or Power BI positions, if you see a certification on a resume, is that a bunch of brownie points, or is it mediocre, or is it like this person is wasting their time? They should just, I don't know, work on a volunteer project or something.
I don't put too much in certifications, and we've talked about that before. I don't think that they're nothing, but to me, they are like, you have a baseline understanding of the technical aspects of the tool. And again, that is but one part of it, and a lot of that is Googleable.
Right. Well, it's just interesting because I've been thinking through that of like, for whatever reason, if a certification backed by a specific tool, people just eat that up like candy. I don't know.
Some places do.
Oh, I'm talking about people looking for jobs. I think it's a self-soothing. It's like I'm working towards this and this is tangible, to where so much of growing your career and advancing is not, it's just like, it's like losing weight or working out. It's like you go to the gym for 3 months and then you're slowly making these little tiny incremental, and then all of a sudden you've kind of hit your goals, in this situation, be getting that job. But there aren't really concrete like markers of, okay, I'm progressing in the right direction.
No, and I think too, it's so much of like, what do you personally want to do? Like I said, do you want to be a manager? Do you want to program sorry, there is a very large lightning. So maybe that.
Oh no.
Maybe that is a tornado siren actually happening right now. I'm not sure. It is Wednesday at 1:00, right? And is it the first Wednesday?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
That's the 7th.
There was a very large, let me just check.
Okay.
1 second, I apologize. Hopefully you can edit this, but I should check if I'm supposed
Well, I typically don't edit these videos. Christina, I did want to ask you though.
No, I think we're okay.
Christina, what has been your experience, kind of, what have you learned working on these consulting projects?
Like just in general?
Like, I guess reflect kind of, because so me and Bethany have been talking about, well, okay, actually, I'm going to put you on the spot here. So let's transition into the student interactive portion. So Bethany, a typical interview question might be something like, Christina, tell me about a Tableau or a Power BI project that you've worked on.
And I might ask you about one, the couple flavors I could just kind of generically ask. I might ask you about one that you're particularly proud of. I might ask you about one that went particularly poorly.
Okay. Christina, answer that question.
So the one that I'm proud of.
Yeah.
Something better. Okay. A Tableau project that we recently worked on in class for a client involved analyzing data from the sales of a specific product line that had launched, and specifically looking at how the products were performing in different regions. And so we were able to create a visualization that showed where the distribution centers were for every product, and also we're able to break down how each item was performing in each of those regions. And that was something that had not been visualized before for the client. So when he saw it, he was able to get some pretty useful insights that would tell him, which products are doing better and which products are falling behind.
So after something like that, then I'd probably just pick, ask more questions. So for instance, okay, so you were bringing, how many data sources did you have that you had to put together for this?
We put together 3 different data sources.
Okay.
And we ended up having to, the easiest way to combine the sources was using a VLOOKUP in Excel. So we just put those into a single file and then imported those into Tableau just to make it easier to connect them all.
So did you import it as one file, or did you have multiple files that you imported and combined in Tableau?
No, we just ended up doing a single file. It was easier that way. At first we had attempted doing the 3 different files, but we realized it was just easier putting them all into Excel.
So when you tried to put them together in Tableau, what kind of technical challenges did you face that made you decide to move to Excel?
Well, I think it was the different distribution centers had specific codes to them, but it didn't necessarily tell us their location. So it was just like a generic code. So when we tried to pull them in, and if we were trying to connect them using those codes, we weren't getting the geographical information that was needed for a map visualization.
Okay, so how did you go about then getting that geographical information that you needed for mapping?
So we had another source that had zip codes and distribution codes. So we were able to put them all into a single file and then use a VLOOKUP to match every single distribution code to a zip code. And then when we imported that into Tableau, it just automatically gives you the location without having to create the connections in Tableau.
So you were just trying to get down to the zip code level. You weren't trying to actually map the specific lat long.
It ended up, the zip codes, were able to give us individual cities. And really that was what was needed for visualization. So we were able to get that information pretty easily.
Okay. Were there any other kind of data challenges that you had where you had to manipulate the data?
No, I don't think we really faced a lot of challenges with the data. It was pretty clean data. So in that aspect, it was fairly simple.
All right. John, I don't know how you want to go, or how you want to go from here.
Well, okay, I guess let me interject here. So I guess for those of you who are watching this as a podcast episode, that Bethany, this is kind of how you would approach getting. So what are you doing here? So I guess let's kind of make this like a meta conversation. So what is your goal of kind of prodding? Are you trying to see how Christina thinks, how she problem solves, understanding what the context actually is for the conversation?
Yeah. So a lot of times, like I said, getting sort of an overall view. Okay, what did you do for this project? And then just trying to dig in and figure out some more about like, well, what are their technical skills? How are they, and what is their approach? How well can they tell me? You know, okay, you had some data problems. How did you go about solving them, right? Like say you had missing data. Okay, did you try to fill it in? Did you leave it blank? Did you go back and talk to the business and try to figure out if it was a problem with the file that was sent to you got cut off, or you know, understanding if the missings mean something, and just understanding more their process and the level at which they're digging in and understanding how the process of putting the data together, fixing problems. Did they just make decisions and do things? Did they go back and ask questions?
Okay, so I have some also
All those
some,
kinds of things. It could go any way depending upon like what comes up, right?
right. I have some additional details that I kind of wanted to riff with you on. Of so Christina, so they did use a VLOOKUP to pull the zip code into the RDC so they can map the RDC. The reason that we chose to do that, which maybe I didn't do a good job as a professor making that judgment call, of like, I don't have a lot of experience with Tableau prep. So building a data model, I would have to learn a new software. So this
Tableau
was
prep's
not
really easy.
what Tableau prep.
It's really easy.
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah. So, but I think that this is an opportunity to talk about efficiency from like Christina's level of, so we created a standalone ad hoc report that looked at RDC one time. So we had a reporting infrastructure that updated every 2 months, and we are working on projects to update that infrastructure. But since this was just a standalone ad hoc report, we made the judgment call of we're just going to manipulate the data in Excel so that we could crank it out and get it back to him within a day, as opposed to learning a new software and having to implement it and test it and get it all the bugs worked out. I think that kind of shows. Well, actually, what does that show from your perspective?
So to me, I mean, my expectation of what somebody would have done is going to be different depending upon one, what have they told me their skills are, right? If you haven't told me that you program Python, I'm not going to expect that you're, you know, like if you haven't put any programming, I'm not going to expect that you're going to go find a programmatic approach to putting these data sets together, right?
Right.
But, you know, that's where I was like, you know, did you look at it in the, if you can put files together in Tableau, why did it not work? Like, do you understand, did somebody tell you not to do it that way? Or do you understand why that was a problem? Right? Because you can do some joins directly in Tableau. There is also now, Tableau prep is another way, and it's easier to integrate in there. A lot of times, if you're doing something one-off, writing a whole program versus just brute forcing it doesn't make any sense, right? It's going to take you too long. If you're looking to do it on repeat, sometimes getting the first thing out is, again, you just brute force it and then you go back and, you know, work on the efficiencies. And that's something where, like, if that is a plan, like, oh, I did it this way, but I know it wasn't the best way, I would, you know, it's good to proactively talk about why did you pick these things, right? We ended up putting it together in Excel because we only had one day to do the turnaround. That was the thing we were most comfortable with, and we knew we could knock it out quickly and get it back and get it to the client. That is a very good reason for having picked Excel.
Right. Well, so that was the criticism I had for Christina's kind of the way that she talked about it, because I mean, man, I feel like I'm like pulling back like the Jedi levels, like sales tactics. Like I can take something that's technically bad for a client and spin it so it's like, oh no, this is an opportunity, to where we didn't teach Tableau prep, and instead of being like, yeah, we could have done it more effective, or like, because you drill down on the fact that she used Excel to manipulate the data to then pull it in. I think it's like, that's an opportunity for you to say, we used good judgment to expedite the project or something like that. So that's kind of the criticism that I would have for Christina's on that.
And I might, you know, in certain circumstances, if I was concerned about that, or, you know, ask, well, did you have other tools that did you consider other kinds of tools? What specifically made you do Excel? But yeah, the more you can proactively say, you know, we picked Tableau Prep because we knew we were going to have this be a repeatable process. And so we wanted to set it up where we could change the files and have it run through and not have to recreate the wheel every time. We wanted to do this, and, you know, but everything has different circumstances. And that's where I think that, you know, there's not a right answer. And there's times you do things because it's what you had to do to get it done. And that is important, right? Like, I have worked with people who have very rigid processes and it can make them very difficult to work with. If you are super rigid and it's like, this is the way that it needs to be done, this is the right way to do it, I would say there's an optimal or idealized way to do a lot of things. But you don't always in the real world have the luxury of doing that, right? Like, ideally, I would never fix data. It would all be perfect in the source systems, and it would be extracted and come to me, and everybody would have thought about the repercussions for analytics and reporting and model building of how they have set up all of their operation systems. Nobody does, right? And that is never going to happen. And even if I'm trying to create like a data lake and things out of the data lake that are more robust and have been aligned, and there's a process for that, sometimes I may not get to fully do that the way I want to do it either, because somebody needs to have something done or something bad is going to happen, right? You know, if you're working in payroll, well, guess what? I could have everything perfect, or people can get paid. Right?
I think that scarcity note is something that's not talked about enough in academia.
I can do something perfect, or my customer cannot be pissed off because they actually received the thing on time.
Right. There are trade-offs.
Yeah, it's all about, there's a trade-off, and, you know, sometimes you got to do it the way you don't really want to do it, and then circle back and do 2 or 3 times as much work because now I need to fix it so it's better and more towards my idealized solution going forward.
So with the trade-offs, essentially you need to practice good judgment. Like, is this going to have a better long-term sustainable solution than this? And being able to talk through that meta commentary, I think, is a big check mark from someone hiring you as your analytics manager.
Yes. I mean, if you're talking about a project, proactively throwing in, you know, here we considered some different, you know, not just what did we do, but some of the things like, well, we had considered this, that, or the other thing, and then we decided to choose this. Now, some of it depends on, you know, there's a balance there too, right? I don't want, if I've just asked you, tell me a little bit about, you know, your favorite project you worked on. I don't want every single nitty-gritty decision that you made, right? I want kind of an overview. But if there's some big ones of like, you know, we did this in this platform, you know, if you did consider like the pros and cons of a few platforms and picked it, and that was sort of a significant part of what you did, include that. You know, we were, you know, debating between if we should do our cleanup in Python or Tableau Prep, but we knew we were going to need to transition it to somebody who wasn't a programmer. And so we decided that Tableau Prep was going to be the better way to integrate our data. Right. So you still don't have to get like too nitty gritty about it. But like, if there's a major turning point decisions that were made, you know, highlight those. It doesn't just have to be, because particularly ones where you were involved are important, because a lot of things happen in teams. And I've interviewed people. So this is the other thing you need to be careful of, is like, I have interviewed people where they rely a little too much on the we. Like, the we is great, right? But at some point it's like, what did you do? Because I'm not hiring your whole team, right? So I need to understand your role, what you can help me achieve, not what your whole team collectively could do.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so let's bring Ben into the conversation. So we had discussed maybe having Ben talk about data modeling and have you ask the question, what is data modeling? But I think that the conversation with you has pivoted. It's like Bob Ross, where there was like a happy little accident, where you're a lot more conversation based, which I was kind of expecting you to be like, oh yeah, here are the top 3 questions that I ask, every interview or something like that. And it sounds like you kind of just like vibe and flow, and it's more of a conversation versus just kind of like a list of here are the check marks.
Yeah, because I don't think that you can, to me, if I have a very strict list of check marks, I'm going to miss out on somebody who's really good, who has maybe not one of those things.
Okay,
right?
So Ben, why don't you talk about, so Christina just talked about phase 2 of the project that they're working on this semester in the capstone course. Ben, why don't you talk about phase 1, and then Bethany, you can kind of like, I guess, role play as the interviewer here. Because I loved what you and Christina put out. That was, I learned a lot from that, like how you kind of piece things out. But Ben, bear in mind kind of that judgment piece of like, well, also, should I give this to you? I'm going to give it to you. Ben, you were the project manager. You need to incorporate that into, I'm cheating. I'm giving him answers. You should say, I led a team.
Right.
So I think that's pretty strong. I don't know, Bethany, if you agree with that.
If you led a team, that's important.
Right. Okay. So Bethany, I'll let you, I guess, ask a question about Ben and his project.
Well, so I might ask people, have you ever led a project?
And then I could go into.
You just answer, yes, I have. And then I would ask you, so what were the different roles on the project? How big was the team? What were you trying to achieve? Some outlining of what that project was.
Yeah, so phase 1 of our project, I was, I guess, selected or naturally selected into the team manager, and our team consisted of 3 of us, me, Christina, and Connor. And basically the goal of this was to talk with our client, Mr. Oliver, and come up with some solutions for Summitland, which was a project that he needed some more insights on. And so basically with my role as the lead, I needed to organize meetings. I needed to reach out to Mr. Oliver and figure out when he was available during the week so that we could schedule some meetings with him to have check-ins, get feedback from him, and then show him our final product.
Okay, so what did you find most challenging about that role?
I guess the most challenging thing for me was that being an athlete, and having a pretty busy schedule, and as well as Connor, he's on the golf team, I'm on the baseball team, there was a lot of conflicts, scheduling meetings. There'd be times where Connor couldn't make it, or I couldn't make it, or Christina couldn't make it, and then we'd feel like we had a good time, and then Mr. Oliver couldn't make it. So
how did you deal with that?
So we were able to figure out a solution where not all 3 of us needed to be on the call at the same time. We met in class every Monday. For the most part, we were all able to be there. And then we were able to come up with a meeting plan of what we wanted to accomplish with the next meeting and the goals coming out of the meeting. And so if someone wasn't able to make it, say I wasn't able to make it, then Christina or Connor knew what the specific bullet points we needed to talk about, we needed to ask which questions, and what we wanted to come out of the meeting with further goals.
Okay. And so did you encounter any issues of, people not carrying their weight, people not getting their work done on time?
No, not really with our group. I think it was good with the three of us because we're all really invested in learning data and business analytics. So it wasn't really just that like nagging school project that we didn't really want to do. It's great experience for us. And I feel like we all equally, either it was putting in work in the classroom or making sure we had all the questions answered or showing up to the meetings. I feel like we all carried our own weight in different ways, but equally.
So how did you guys ever have conflict in your group? How did you resolve that? If you all had, if you had a different idea about how you should approach something, or how a specific visualization should look, how did you go about resolving that?
Yeah, so in class on Mondays, like I mentioned earlier, when we would all get together and work on it, we would all be on our separate laptops, pulling in the same data and kind of going at it, I say, for the first 30 minutes on our own, trying to figure out how we want to do each visualization. And then we'd come together and talk about it. And so say me and Christina had a different opinion on how to make a map. She would say, explain on why she did it this way and on what benefits that map has. I would then explain my way, and then we would kind of collaboratively figure out which is the most optimal solution and which we feel is the best way to present the map to our client.
So how often would you say you went with like one approach or the other, or did you look to try to find the best parts of different people's approaches, and if you could integrate those?
I would say it's about 50-50 because sometimes there would be times when we want to integrate all of our opinions. But at the end of the day, we feel, or at least I feel this way, that I trust Christina and Connor, and I know that they're both smart people and very confident in their Tableau work. So if they feel very strongly about one way that they did something and I can see their points, then we would just roll with whatever visualization they chose and vice versa.
Okay.
Awesome. So Bethany, you said in the chat that you got to wrap up pretty soon. Give a quick critique.
I do. I've got to go back to my
Is 2:30, is that a hard stop? Do you have to stop now?
I'm sorry?
Do you have to stop now, or do you have like a couple minutes to?
I can give you a few more minutes.
Okay. All right. So critique Ben.
So yeah, so I think I hope you all got along. Most groups, even if you get a few people, there is conflict of ideas. So I'm glad everybody carried their weight. One thing that I was kind of looking for and even tried to sort of push you towards maybe a little bit was, it's not always like an either or. It's a, hey, they had this idea and we can that would go with this other idea that was good over here. And can we have a little synergy, for lack of a better word, between different approaches to get sort of better than either of us came up with on our own? Like maybe there's an overlay you didn't know, but this map was better, but hey, they had this underlying map that was really helpful. So let's take this one, but put the underlying map in it, kind of a thing, So, I think that at the best for collaborations, can you get, hopefully you're hoping for something better than any of you could come up with on your own, right? So looking for elements of that, of how could you work collectively to come up with something better.
Perfect.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I mean, overall, I think that's good. One thing I would say is when you're talking to people, like when you start to talk too much about real specific things, like I don't know who people you work with are, like you don't really need to talk about them. You could talk about them in their role, like my teammates or my the manager or my client or things like that. But like, I don't know Bob or, like I know Christina because she's here, but like, I don't even remember your other teammate's name, honestly, because it wasn't like something I was focused on remembering.
Mm-hmm.
So talking about people by name is not that helpful to whoever you're talking to and can sometimes actually get confusing.
Right.
Oftentimes too, for, like speaking about specific businesses, a lot of times you shouldn't really talk too much about specific businesses, depending. That can be a little bit tricky of just, wanting to be, you should always try to be aware and conscientious about privacy of your clients and that they're trusting you with information that isn't generally available. And sometimes it can be, even if you try to mask it, it can be fairly obvious. Like, if you were working in Bentonville, Arkansas, guess what? You were working with Walmart. Like, everybody knows it, even if you don't say it. Like, so there's, I was working for a large mass retailer in Minneapolis, Target, like, so there's certain times when you can try to genericize it and everybody kind of can tell who it is, but you still should try to genericize it. It's just a good practice,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Awesome. Well, Bethany, if you've got to run, I do have some more feedback for Ben, but thank you so much for coming on. This was fantastic.
All right. Well, good luck and good luck with your job searches.
Ben's already landed a job. So
very good. Congratulations. It's not an easy time. So best of luck to you all. And I will talk to you soon, John.
All right. Sounds good. See ya.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So Ben, I think that what you missed out on is that did we already have this conversation in a previous episode where you worked with the president of a company and their marketing subject matter expert, and you kind of relayed the project between the two of them?
I'm not sure if I missed that on a previous episode, but I don't think we covered that.
I think you said that to me.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So first of all, when you're explaining a project, I think that you should start with the impact. So in phase one of the project, you found that I think it was Facebook ads had the highest return on investment for marketing.
Right.
And then go into kind of the specifics of, well, okay, you could say, all right, I led a team of student analysts who worked with the president and the subject matter expert in the marketing department of an organization. We uncovered through our analysis that the Facebook advertising campaigns were providing the highest return on investment. We did this through pulling in 3 different data sources. We created a data scaffold to combine them all so that we could see over a timeline how much money was going towards and being invested in advertising versus how much was being generated from sales from each of those channels. So that's kind of like a very quick one, or like a quick way to explain that. But yeah, I think that, well, you did a good job. I mean, I think I love seeing how Bethany went about kind of getting information out of you, because I think that you felt pretty natural answering those questions.
It felt like a real interview, like that quickly though. Like out of nowhere, I was like, oh, I felt the pressure.
Well, she's legit. It sounds like she's interviewed a ton of people for Tableau and Power BI. So I'm glad that you got that raw experience of being in the hot seat.
Yeah.
All right, Al. So you're up now. I'll let you take over and ask the Q&A.
Okay. So this very unorthodox Q&A, we are asking the podcast host himself the questions, which we have not pre-gamed at all, not seen these questions. Yeah, no pressure. Okay, that they're no worse than the usual questions, I'll warn you. Okay. So Diane Johnson, always good for some good questions. And this is a fantastic one because I wondered this myself. She says, what are some good questions for me to ask the interview?
Ooh, I do like that one. So my immediate impulse is to say, are there opportunities for growth or are there opportunities for me to continue learning? I think asking that will kind of get there. You will get a take on how do they kind of foster growth? Because if they want you just stuck in one specific role and they don't care about kind of cultivating and growing you, that may be kind of a risk to your career because you might get pigeonholed. I feel like we keep going back to COBOL, but you don't want to be a COBOL developer, that's just stuck with one skill set. I would ask for, are there opportunities for me to continue to grow my education? Well, I'm going to push this back on you. What kind of questions do you typically ask companies?
So generally, I will ask something about corporate culture. I feel like the biggest thing to stay away from is never ask anything that you can get the answer yourself, especially if it's on LinkedIn. So if you ask the interviewer, how long have you been with the company, you can just look them up on LinkedIn and see that. And you probably should do that before the interview. If you ask kind of generally, how's the corporate culture, they're going to say it's great. And you can go on any company's website and the about section or the careers section, and it will talk about their corporate culture. It may not be 100% honest, but I think if you ask specifically the interviewer, what do you love about working here? What is your favorite thing about this company? What would you change? Sort of specific questions allow them to talk about why they're at that company. That seems to be a winner. And people just love talking about themselves anyway. So give them a chance to talk about their experience there.
That's true. Yeah. It's funny because I'm kind of not the person to ask, because I'm more of someone to start a company and build that culture rather than someone to apply for a job and see if I fit into an already established corporate culture. So I thought that was just kind of an interesting insight into kind of my mindset and where I'm at. But yeah, I think I would be very fixated, or fixated is too strong. I would be curious to know, like, how are they growing and how are they keeping up? Because you don't want to become a dinosaur.
Yep. So I think if I was interviewing to come work at Silvertone, my question would probably be, as a startup, what are the plans for expansion in the future? And then your expectations, because obviously, if I'm coming to work at Silvertone, I'm coming to work directly for you. What would be your expectations of me professionally? And obviously, there's a job description that I should know if I'm interviewing, but just kind of beyond that, I think if you can kind of nibble at the margins and ask things about that aren't necessarily covered in the job description, and some kind of points of clarification. I think we'll beat that one to death. Okay, so I'm going to try desperately to pronounce this man's name correctly, but I get the feeling this is going to be kind of an ongoing project. Siddish Longley, his last name is. He is asking, do we really need experience even when applying for entry-level jobs?
See, that's such a tricky question, because I've heard hiring managers say two opposite things. Like, they would like someone who already has skills built out and provable. I mean, even earlier on in this episode, Bethany talked about how for an entry-level job, knowing, having some coursework, like maybe you've had 4 courses on visualization, that will give the hiring manager a good indication that you already know. But on the other hand, some hiring managers want you completely new so they can build you kind of from the ground up. That being said, I think that's kind of the spectrum. So it's either someone does want you to kind of hit the ground running versus I want you completely a newbie so I can, completely inform all of your kind of habits and your thoughts. And I think that on the spectrum, it kind of leans more towards they want someone who already knows what they're doing. And I think that to get an entry level, you probably want to have an internship or a volunteer project under your belt, or a portfolio, or maybe you're in like some type of user group. Like the Tableau user groups are a great way to get experience and get some skills, because a lot of times they'll have like hackathons.
Yeah, I actually just got off a counseling with a Marine that's getting out, and he's got his Scrum Master and he's doing Lean Six Sigma. And I said, the best thing you can do is start doing some projects under those umbrellas and have those displayed both on your resume and on your LinkedIn, that I've taken a business problem through to a solution with a team of people, and here was the outcome, here was the benefit I drove. So I think that's just as true in those arenas as it is in data. If you're going to be a project manager or some kind of leader, you got to show that you can manage projects.
Yeah, and I think this kind of gets at that. This space probably 4 or 5 years ago, there was a huge demand, not as much of a supply. I think it's starting to balance out, and even entry level positions are getting a little bit more competitive. So yeah, I think it ultimately depends on like what specific career track you would like to go into.
Sure. Okay, so this one actually is maybe better suited for you than it would have been for Bethany. Shruti Jain, she wants to ask about startups and how different is it trying to make data-driven decisions, which is something I should be able to pronounce, when it comes to startups as opposed to a larger, more established company?
Okay, so that is an excellent question, and I think I've talked about it in class through either High Point or Greensboro College. So with smaller organizations, the major struggle with using data to drive a decision is there's not enough data or lack of data. Then once you get to these bigger organizations, so I don't know what the threshold is, let's say 250 million in revenue. Once you start getting to that, medium or large size, then your problem is not the quantity of data, but the quality. So you'll have a lot of data quality issues because you have maybe 3 different legacy systems and they're all trying to pull data, and it's just messy. So I would say that the major challenge in a startup is just you have to really focus on data governance and how are you going to collect data. Because if you just started this month, you can't do historical analysis because there is no history of your company. So that's kind of the challenge or the rub. One potential solution for that is that you can buy external data. So you could buy industry reports, or you could buy kind of third-party data sources that will give you somewhat of an idea of what your specific market might look like.
Okay. So this one, I kind of answered this in chat, but I want to see if you've got anything to add. Our friend Abhinay Kumar, he asks, how do we explain a project where we solved specific problems in a team? And mainly, what points should we focus on when we apply for an analytics job? Now, I directed him towards the channel videos that address that very subject. And just wanted to see if you had anything that you wanted to add to that.
Wait, can you rephrase the question again? So are you talking
He's
about explaining your
briefing
role?
Projects. How do you describe your project? He asks where you're in a team. So I don't know if the stress was on, I'm a team member, what do I say that I did?
Mm-hmm.
Or just what's the best way to talk about a project? I know that recently in some discussions, it's come up that do you bring up your projects in a story, like where they say, hey, tell me about a time that you had a great success or that you had a failure or something like that. And I know we did a video with Dr. Hall talking about that. Just wondering if you had any kind of clarification or anything to add.
Okay, I love this question. I actually have kind of been gestating on this exact thing. So when you're working in a team environment, there are 2 soft skills that are kind of conflicting. So you have leadership and you have teamwork. So they're a little bit at odds for each other, because if you aren't the team leader, but yet you're the one trying to pigeonhole or push the project in a specific direction, then it's like you're too strong on the leadership side and you need to be a little bit more collaborative. So I think what you want to do, let's put it into a framework. So number 1, I would start with giving the impact you had and the context. So for example, with my Greensboro College students, the impact they had with the project they're working on, or the first phase of the project they're working on, was that they found out which marketing channel had the best return on investment. To give them broader context, they were working with a large organization, and they were kind of parlaying this information between the marketing manager and the president of the company. So that kind of, start with the impact, then give context, and then you can kind of go into, so Ben Knuff was the team leader in that situation. So just the fact that he is the one setting up the meetings, finding a time, that's leadership. But then what he could do to make it seem like he's not, you know, like just pushing and being overly in that space. He could say, well, what we did in our meetings is we would all work on the project separately and then come together as a team. And it was really interesting kind of picking different approaches from different people and collaborating to come up with the right solution.
Okay. Ben seems well suited for that.
Right. Yeah.
He would have made a pretty good Marine. So we're gonna cut it back to 5 this week. We went hog wild last week. We're gonna trim it back. So 5th and final question. Our favorite, Pooja Chavan, the data mom. So she asks, and I'm gonna make a wild prediction here. The answer is going to be, it depends, ... She asks, what counts more, certifications or experience? Hypothetical, if 2 candidates apply for the same position, one with an edge in experience of 5-6 years in the field, but no relevant certifications. The second one has less experience, but still some, 1 or 2 years, and multiple certifications. Let's say Google Data Analytics, Project Manager, name another one, IBM Analytics. Who will the hiring manager pick and why?
Okay, Al, well, I'm going to have to ask you to think again, because I think experience trumps certifications. I think certifications just mean that you studied so you could check a box, to where it doesn't show that application, to where if you worked for a year solving real business problems in Power BI or Tableau, that is a whole lot more impressive than just having, and I feel like I'm shooting, you know, ourselves in the foot here, because we're ranking like number 1 or number 2 for Power BI and Tableau certification on YouTube, the YouTube search algorithm. But I think that the reason there seems to be a discrepancy between people looking for jobs, how important they see certifications versus how important hiring managers see certifications. And actually, Bethany has swayed me on this, because if you go back to the previous interview we had with Bethany, she says they're not that important. Like they're nice to have, but she is much more interested in understanding, how do you think? How do you deal with ambiguity? How do you deal with relating to people, resolving conflicts, making assumptions, managing relationships with people? That's so much more nebulous, but I would say much more important. I think people value certification so much because it's a self-soothing mechanism. It's like, oh, I just I checked this box. I'm good to go. I know Power BI. I've got that handled.
This piece of paper shows that I'm qualified.
Right. Well, it's kind of like something I've talked about with Michael Galarnik. I think it's this line of thinking that is very prominent in education, where they're teaching people how to be good girls and good boys and follow directions. And it's like, that does not map onto the real world. Like the working in a company, there's a lot of new problems that pop up, and you're not going to have like a 1, 2, 3 step process for everything. So you're going to have to start thinking on your own, as opposed to seeing what's in the textbook, memorizing it, and then regurgitating it back in a test format.
So I think we can add to what Robin said about tool agnostic. Now we're pimping being cert agnostic as well.
Well, yeah. I still think there's a place for them. I think that, I mean, if anything, it might help your mental health in your journey to get a job. Just like it gives you something concrete to focus on, and it's a milestone to pass. But yeah, I think that people overvalue certifications quite a bit.
Okay, we'll take that. The judges have said you get credit for that one. So
I've been a good boy.
yes, the Godfather, John David Arianson, passed his own superfan quiz. Well done.
Wow.
5 for 5.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for hosting this impromptu Q&A. It feels weird being in the hot seat on my own podcast. I'm used to one throwing the heat out.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we should turn the tables more often and ask you more questions.
Oh, that's true.